You're listening to ChainLeak, the crypto news podcast with your host, Joshua Roomsberg. Follow and subscribe today.
Welcome to the ChainLeak podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Roomsberg. Today's episode is about cross-chain bridges, connecting Cardano, presented by Wanchain. Today's guest, Temujin Louis. Welcome back to the show, brother. Hope all is well.
Yeah, things are great, Josh. Thanks for having me back. I'm looking forward to another good conversation with you.
All right. So first, give the listeners a reintroduction to Wanchain and a variety of different products you guys are offering the industry.
Sure. Yeah. For those of you who are not familiar with Wanchain, Wanchain is an R&D focused blockchain interoperability project. So what that means is we're basically working on building the infrastructure so that two different blockchains can basically communicate with one another to share data, to basically function as, one larger network, basically like an internet of blockchains. Okay. And we've been at this for a long time. We've been doing it officially since 2017. If you look at the roots, it stretches back even further than that. But really, this is what we've been focused on from day one. So we're really kind of proud by the fact that we can honestly say that we're pioneers in this space. And as you said, we have several products. It started, with the first public decentralized bridge that was actually Wanchain. At that time, it was using, wrapped assets. This is something that your viewers are probably familiar with. And we moved from there to things like NFT bridges. And, right now, our most popular product is actually something we just call XFlows. And XFlows is a little special because it deals with, native assets on both sides. There's not wrapped assets. So if you're doing, a real USDT on one chain to a real USDT on another chain, this is serviced by XFlows.
Okay, now that sounds pretty crazy. You mentioned the wrapped assets and how wrapped assets can move between chains. You're saying USDC can move between chains, and instead of being wrapped, they're native assets for each chain?
That's right. Like in the early days of bridging, what all the bridges were doing was basically you'd have, the original asset, let's say BTC on Bitcoin, and you wanted to use it on Ethereum or any type of blockchain. Then the bridge would basically make a mirrored version of it. We called it wrapped assets. And it's basically, just an asset that's backed one-to-one with the original asset, so you can use it in DeFi and things like that. But over the last couple of years, some of these blue chip projects, things like, Tether with USDT, Circle like USDC, and also interestingly, some things like ETH, now that you have all these different layer twos and things like that. So you have like one asset that exists natively on multiple different chains. So this is what XFlows services. If you want USDT on Arbitrum and you want to move it to Optimism, if on Optimism it exists there natively, that's the one you want. You don't want this bridge that you've chosen to use to just mint a wrapped asset. You want the one that already exists. It's already being used in that ecosystem, so you don't have to worry about liquidity and things like that. So, that's what XFlows does.
That was another thing I noticed yesterday. As a matter of fact, I was messing around with Avalanche, and I had Avalanche on C-Chain, but then I had a wrapped Avalanche, and I couldn't understand why they would have a wrapped Avalanche on top of Avalanche C-Chain. That didn't make any sense to me, but that's kind of what you were just talking about. If it's a native asset to that chain, why would you want the wrapped asset? I didn't understand why I had the wrapped asset. That was crazy.
Yeah, not to go off topic here, that's probably something a little bit different, because when you're dealing with EVM chains, so you have ETH, for example, on Ethereum, that's your native coin. And on Avalanche, you have AVAX. And, these native coins, they're different from all other assets that exist on that chain. So, if you're dealing with like an ERC20 token on Ethereum, this is something that, interacts with smart contracts and things like that. Actually, ETH itself cannot interact with smart contracts in the same way. And so that's why on those chains, you'll have WETH, you'll have, the wrapped AVAX. But a level even beyond that in terms of inconvenience is if, for example, on Avalanche, Circle issues USDC themselves. That's the official USDC. What you don't want is some bridge like Wanchain, kind of just minting another version
Wrapped asset,
of that,
yep.
right? A wrapped asset. You want the one that Circle is issued there themselves. If it exists on that chain, that's what everyone's going to be using. That's the one that can be redeemed for the underlying USD. This is the one you want. So this is what XFlows does.
That comes back to, with the wrapped asset as well, certain platforms and exchanges don't necessarily support a wrapped asset. So then you have that on the back end that you have to worry about when you deal with wrapped assets. When you do cross-chain bridges, if you could have main chain to main chain or main asset to main asset, you get a better fluid movement between chains.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's exactly the pain point or the obstacle that we're trying to solve with XFlows. So right now in XFlows we support 4 different assets.
Okay.
We do BTC, we do ETH, we do USDT, and we do USDC. So things like USDT, USDC, this is pretty obvious. The ones that we support are the ones that are issued by Circle or by Tether. With ETH, we do between Ethereum and the various layer 2s. So for example, if you want to go use Arbitrum, you have to use like their official bridge to bring your ETH from Ethereum to Arbitrum. But let's say, you want to play on Optimism as well. Optimism, same idea. It's a layer 2. So you use their official bridge to go from Ethereum, bring the ETH to Optimism. But what if you want to go between Arbitrum and Optimism? There's no in-house official solution by the L2s. They obviously want you to only come to their L2. They don't want you to use the competitor. And so something like, if you were actually going to do it with only, let's say, the in-house official solutions that they build, you'd have to go, Arbitrum to Ethereum to Optimism, and you're picking up, gas fees along the way. The whole point that you enter in L2 is you don't want to pay gas on Ethereum. So it defeats the purpose. Something like XFlows, you just go direct. So you're going ETH on Arbitrum directly to ETH on Optimism. You're not going through the L1. You're not picking up all these extra fees. So it's just way better.
That's something I experienced, I want to say it was like a month ago. And I think I was dealing with Ethereum. But I was trying to move funds from Ethereum to Optimism and then Arbitrum. And the way I had to move that, I couldn't find a easy solution. As an end user moving between these 3 chains, I couldn't figure it out. So I had to move it to a exchange, convert it into something different, move it back, and then it was a waste of time. Plus, it was a waste of gas fees in between. Then the exchange takes a percentage for the transaction. So it was like, man, I just wasted $20, $30 on trying to move this money around. That didn't make sense to me. So you're saying that the Wanchain XFlows can counteract or make it more intuitive?
That's exactly right. This pain point that you experience, that's exactly what XFlows solves.
Okay.
As you explained, if XFlows didn't exist, what you're probably going to end up doing is you're either going to go to a centralized exchange. Okay, everyone's going to have a different opinion about, centralization in blockchain. So that's a decision you'd have to make, but that's one way you could do it. Or you could use the official in-house solutions by Arbitrum and Optimism, like I explained. And kind of even more excessive is that if you actually use those in-house bridges, and you want to go from Arbitrum to Ethereum, it actually takes you 7 days or more than 7 days, like an in real life week. So you can do it with XFlows. This way, it remains decentralized. It takes just 5 minutes, and then you don't have to use a centralized exchange. You can kind of stay true to your belief in decentralization, and it's just one click, you're done.
Now that's another aspect when an end user is coming to Wanchain to use the XFlows. What types of transaction fees or costs would be associated with using XFlows?
Sure. So the fees are very, very low. They're definitely, on purpose, lower than all competing bridges. Now, in terms of what that actually is, it kind of depends on the chains that are involved. So currently, a lot of our routes that we support on the bridge are feeless. So we're not charging any service fees to use it. There's a few exceptions. So if you were to, for example, bridge to Ethereum, then there will be a small bridge fee because that will have to basically, cover the gas fee on Ethereum. Because even if, the user, you're only, let's say, signing a transaction on the source chain. The bridge itself, has to do transactions on both chains. So most of the time that's cheap, but Ethereum's expensive. So that's, for example, one example. But this is something, that we're experimenting with right now. We're trying different fee levels on a variety of chains because that is something that's going to come in the relatively near future where we'll have kind of a more mature bridge fee structure. And, this is something that has been, actually requested by a lot of Wanchain supporters because they want to kind of see the bridge bound more to the Wancoin. So that's something that we're working on.
That was another thing last week, I believe, or 2 weeks ago. I went to the Wanchain bridge and I was trying to bridge, it was either USDC or USDT from a random blockchain onto Ethereum. But I was getting my head cracked like $15, $20, and I didn't understand that. You're saying that's because of the Ethereum gas fees?
That's right. So, if you're a user and you want to go use OneBridge to move back to Ethereum, all you're going to do is basically, let's just say, for example, you're doing Arbitrum to Ethereum, just for example.
Yep.
So to start the cross-chain transaction, you're going to, go in your MetaMask, you're going to sign a transaction on Arbitrum. It's going to be a few cents. And then that's it. That's the only cost you're going to incur. But if you're going to Ethereum, the bridge itself actually has to still sign transactions on Ethereum to make this work. And so they're incurring, the bridge itself is incurring a cost. So that's kind of one of the exceptions where we just have to charge a fee.
What do you feel is the most minimum XFlows for USDC?
A lot of them are just set to 0. So that would be the minimum. So if you're doing, for example, Avalanche to Arbitrum, that'll just be no fee. So it'll just be 0.
Okay. That's what I was trying to get at. So say Matic and Smart Chain. What type of fees would you be looking at moving USDC between these two chains?
Right now, that'll just be no fees. So you as a user, if you're on Matic, the only thing that you're going to pay is, the gas fee on Polygon. So that'll again be just a few cents, maybe 20 cents or whatever it is today.
Yeah.
And then that's the only
and then similar
cost.
on Smart Chain.
But you won't pay that. So the Wanchain bridge right now will just subsidize that for you. You won't pay any additional fee for that. So for you, the end user, on these cheap chain to cheap chain, it'll just be free.
Okay, so the only transaction fee you would incur in that process would be on Matic. You don't get a secondary fee on Smart Chain?
Correct.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Now, that's another thing, because I like moving between chains. I like the whole concept of being free to move your assets on the internet. It's so crazy when people look at fiat dollars and the conversion rates and trying to move that internationally or in between, even say North America and South America. Any countries down there in South America, you have to go through a process to even get funds down there, and then they might not even accept the conversions. Like I seen something, I want to say it was a week or two ago, Tucker Carlson. He went to a country down in South America, and he said his conversion rate for a $100 bill was a stack of just paper dollars from some other country down there. And when you think about them conversions, now that we have blockchain and the ability to move funds all around the world instantaneously, it's incredible that we can move in between chains, and them conversions can be, like you said, almost free. Basically, it's crazy to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's why blockchain's catching on. That's why things like international remittance, moving money from one country to another is kind of the, let's say, premier use case, that everyone has always been talking about since day one for blockchain, because it is such a perfect fit. And it's kind of exactly, what blockchain is good at.
Yep. Now, another aspect of the XFlows is Wanchain's BTC XFlows. Could you give us a little more in depth on that? What does the BTC Bitcoin XFlows look like?
Sure, that's a good question. Shows you've been paying attention to what I'm talking about, because that is like a weird one if you look at USDT, USDC. But obviously, as we said, or as everyone knows, rather, BTC only exists on Bitcoin natively. It doesn't exist on any other chains. Excuse me. But there are some very, very prominent wrapped Bitcoins that exist on a few networks. The most famous would be WBTC on Ethereum. It's one of the biggest tokens in the world. And what it is it is in itself a wrapped BTC, but it is, so widespread at this stage. And there's a few other ones. So like there's BTC.B on Avalanche. This is the official wrapped BTC of the Avalanche ecosystem, but it's wrapped by the official Avalanche bridge. And then similarly on BNB chain, Binance Smart Chain, you have these like Binance pegged tokens. So that is their Binance pegged BTC, the ones that are guaranteed by Binance themselves. And so that's why we kind of sometimes call XFlows cross-chain transformations, because when you're using BTC XFlows, the concept's the same. You're going to end up with a version of BTC on these chains that you want to have that's already being used throughout the ecosystem. So if you're using BTC XFlows, it's BTC on Bitcoin. You use XFlows to go to Avalanche, you're just going to end up with BTC.B, the one that's used everywhere there. You go to BNB chain, you go to Ethereum, WBTC.
Does Wanchain wrap Bitcoin themselves, or do they only use external resources?
On those chains, we only support the widespread versions of Bitcoin. So you're not going to end up where, for example, on BNB chain, there's two versions. There's the Binance-backed one, and then there's one wrapped by Wanchain. No, if you're going to BNB chain, we're only supporting the one that's already backed by Binance and the Binance Peg BTC. Same thing on Avalanche. Cool. Same thing on Ethereum.
Now, the next aspect of our conversation is bridging Cardano. Could you give us a more in-depth look at what you guys have done for the Cardano ADA ecosystem?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that we are very excited about. It's one of our most recent milestones, and it was a huge kind of undertaking for Wanchain, honestly. We were cracking away at it for over a year. It took our efforts. We had to work with some of the organizations that build Cardano themselves to make some changes to the Cardano network just to make bridging possible.
Okay.
And one of the reasons is that Cardano, for those who not used it, it's like a totally different thing from Ethereum-like blockchains, which a lot of viewers are probably familiar with. It has different smart contract environments, different programming languages, even transaction models. Just everything's different, basically. There's kind of no overlap. And so it was a huge thing. And now those things are live. We're very, very happy about that. And it's getting, really good traction in the Cardano community. And, on day one, we connected Cardano to, I believe it was 11 different blockchain networks. So direct bridges going from Cardano to Bitcoin, Cardano to Ethereum, and on and on and on. Basically, all the big kind of EVMs. And this is, I think, big news for the Cardano ecosystem themselves, because there's like a few things that are interesting about Cardano. First is that obviously it's a huge network. If you go on CoinMarketCap, it's right up near the top. But there's a few things that they haven't had, which might surprise you. For example, Cardano has never had a fiat-backed stablecoin.
Wow.
No USDT, no USDC. So we've obviously bridged those assets over. And so this is like the first time that there's fiat-backed stablecoins. And, anyone who's played in DeFi, stablecoins are a huge part of that. Very, very powerful for building DeFi. Yep. So, so far, so good. There's a lot of traction on those Cardano bridges, and we're focusing on kind of building liquidity and building kind of use cases with those projects, but everything's going well. We're very, very happy.
Now, let's go a little more in depth about the value that is being created between Wanchain and Cardano. Are your ecosystems growing with this new bridging aspect and connecting Cardano to the rest of the ecosystems that are available?
Yeah. So what we're really seeing, is the influx of liquidity into the Cardano ecosystem from these other chains where, previously it was impossible. So, I think really the most exciting thing right now, the low-hanging fruit, let's call it, are these stable coins.
Yep. Okay.
So, right now, in the last couple of weeks, these are pretty new, these bridges. So in the last couple of weeks, more than 400,000 USDC have already been bridged to Cardano. And because, our cross-chain infra is like, yeah.
Let me stop you there. That's exclusively on the Wanchain bridge, 400,000 USDC?
That's right, yeah, because we're actually the only decentralized bridge, that is in Cardano right now. Because as I mentioned, it's a completely different infrastructure. So, all these other bridges that you might have heard of, they just don't service Cardano because it's too difficult to build. Yeah.
I just wanted to drive that point home. I think that's really, really big. Another aspect is this past month was the 6-year anniversary of the Cardano Genesis. Mm-hmm. Is there a reason why you guys wanted to push this through right now? Does it have any? Is it just a coincidence, the timing, or was there a effort to try and get it for the 6th anniversary?
I wish I could say it was all for the 6th anniversary, but this one is a coincidence. Actually, okay. I mentioned right at the top, there was some things that needed to change in the Cardano blockchain itself to make these type of bridges possible. So this is something that we worked with a firm called IOG to make happen. Not to go into too much technical detail, but basically there was some elliptic curves and some signature schemes that we needed to support. Cardano did not support them natively, so it's just a coincidence that it's 6 years because we had to work so long and kind of making real fundamental changes to Cardano itself for the bridges to work.
Now, when it comes to the 6-year anniversary of Cardano ecosystem, did that play a factor in Wanchain choosing to build out bridges and start connecting Cardano?
The real reason for the Cardano bridges is that Cardano is kind of the perfect use case for Wanchain's overall vision of interoperability. At this stage, bridging from one EVM to another EVM is very, very simple. Relatively speaking, it's pretty straightforward. We can just do it. A lot of people can do it, but that's not really what interoperability is about. We want different types of networks with underlying architectures that are good at doing different things, but we still need them to be able to share data and kind of function as one internet of blockchains, if blockchain's ever really going to kind of become something. So, Cardano, as I mentioned, it's a huge network. It's also very different. They share kind of philosophically, a same worldview as Wanchain in terms of, measure twice, cut once type of approach to building, kind of security first, very, academic focused. So that's a lot of things that Wanchain shares. So this is kind of really why we, spent so much time and resources on bridging to Cardano.
Another aspect I was thinking is the age of the network or the amount of users. Did either one of them play a factor in the emphasis of working on the Cardano ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the number of users. Like, Cardano is huge. You might not kind of bump into necessarily people who are using Cardano all the time because it's a very insular ecosystem, let's say. So people who are into Cardano, they're all about Cardano. They rarely will use Ethereum, and vice versa. People who are really into Ethereum, they're rarely using things on Cardano. And I think, very, very long term and more conceptually, this is kind of what Wanchain wants to bridge. We get these different communities to kind of interact. And learn from each other. They're doing this well over here, they're doing this well over here, and everyone can kind of grow and improve together. So that's kind of more conceptually what we're wanting to do. But definitely the kind of size of Cardano, the number of users, how passionate they are, was a big reason why we bridged there. But also just the kind of technical expertise or just the quality of the tech in the Cardano side was also very appealing to us because 6 years is a long time, but it also means that it's been stress tested for a long time, and that's also very important. It has survived 6 years. It's never gone down. There's some other newer chains. They're going offline. They're getting rebooted. This is Cardano went 6 years without any of these type of issues, and similarly, Wanchain is an equally old project. We're also approaching 6 years of our bridges, having never gone down, no hacks, anything like that. So it's, kind of old friends, let's say, because there's not that many projects who've been around that long.
Been able to survive, right? I got you. Now, another aspect that Wanchain has been focused on lately is the USDC bridges and the XFlows for USDC. Now, can we talk about the Circle, USDC, CCTP versus Wanchain XFlows?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who don't know, CCTP is Circle's official in-house solution for cross-chain USDC. XFlows, we talked a little bit about it already. From the user's perspective, it essentially accomplishes the same thing. You start on one chain with the real USDC, and then you end on another chain still with the real USDC.
Yeah.
Obviously, behind the scenes, very, very different. But for a user, it's basically the same thing. Now, Circle, this is pretty new for Circle. They've been working on it for a long time, but it only recently went to mainnet on a few chains. And Wanchain has been there with them from the start. We serve as launch partners for CCTP, and we integrate it directly into our own cross-chain bridges. Now, just in terms of quickly what CCTP does and how it's a little bit different is with CCTP, if you're using that, it's a little bit centralized. But that's just kind of goes with USDC. If you have a zero tolerance for anything centralized, you won't use USDC, so you just accept it. And then what it actually does is it actually burns the real USDC on the source chain and actually mints real USDC on the destination chain. Whereas with XFlows, the big difference is it's just lock, unlock.
That's what I was trying to get at. I was going to ask you, but I knew where you were going with it. I just didn't know if that was the point you were driving home there. Because in the back of my mind, with Circle being the one that mints USDC, I was trying to comprehend in my head, well, they have the ability to burn and mint. So why wouldn't they just burn whatever you're sending them and they'll mint it on the new chain? And does that have any impact on pricing and transaction fees when they mint and burn?
So in terms of transaction fees, they're very cheap, but they're essentially the same that you'd get with XFlows, for example.
Okay.
So the way we're handling it is really more collaborative. Honestly, we love seeing something like CCTP come out of Circle. We want to see, these industry leaders think about interoperability and kind of help push the whole industry forward in that sense. So CCTP is great. And that's why we integrate it directly into Wanchain Bridge. So when you're using, bridge.wanchain.org, when you're using XFlows, if you're selecting two chains where CCTP exists, you're just going to use CCTP. The bridge will just funnel you through CCTP in the background. It'll indicate it on the UI, so you know what's happening. But so if you go, USDC, Ethereum to Avalanche, okay, CCTP exists. It'll just use CCTP through Wanchain Bridge. That's why we're always there on day one. And if you are doing a route where CCTP doesn't exist, because CCTP is not supported on every single chain that USDC exists on yet. But basically, whenever a new chain supports CCTP, we'll integrate it into WAMBridge. And so we're going to default all users to the official CCTP solution by Circle.
That's cool. Now, do you work directly with Circle to implement these, or do you just pick them up on the back end once they're released?
So CCTP is open, so anyone who wants to integrate CCTP into their app can do so freely. We do work with Circle, though, to make sure that we're there on day one. So that's why we're always included in their announcements as launch partners, because obviously they want to launch with use cases in place. So we have a relationship in that sense where we will be there on day one and we're there as launch partners.
That's cool. Now, when you think about bridges, do you guys have any new fee structure for bridges moving forward to try and move them fees down for an end user?
Yeah, so I teased this a little bit earlier in our talks, but this is something that we're exploring right now. So it's definitely in the plans. It's actually something that's been demanded from our community for the last little while. And I think basically the idea is they want to see the bridge, become more and more bound to the Wancoin, which is, Wanchain's token or Wanchain's coin. And so fees are going to come. They're going to stay minimum. One of our requirements that will remain the cheapest bridge compared to the other bridges out there. But there's a few things that are planned. So one, there's going to be kind of a split between a network fee and a service fee. So the network fee, this is what just the user, like as we were talking about, pays themselves to initiate the transaction. Just signing the transaction in MetaMask, for example. And then the service fee, this is like an additional fee, which right now exists, if you're going to Ethereum, just something that we charge a little bit on top to either cover the gas fees or to have like whatever, a little bit of revenue. And then basically these fees will be used to give a little bit more ownership to the Wanchain ecosystem in terms of future development. So it's going to become a sort of community chest where then the community, you kind of dictate, where these get moved to and what they're used for. And just kind of as an additional benefit, if you're holding WAN coins, you'll also be eligible for discounts once these go live.
Okay, because that's another aspect is when an end user holds X amount of WAN, they would be able to get cheaper fees using the bridges. That was what I was trying to comprehend. Is do you guys have a fee structure in place right now for holding X amount of WAN?
On the mainnet right now, it is not yet live, but it's
Okay.
coming, sooner rather than later. We're doing a kind of few minor tweaks. That's why I'm not saying exact numbers right now because they might,
Yep.
adjust slightly. But conceptually, this is what's coming, and it's going to be here, sooner rather than later. But for the fees, it's as you said, if you're holding WAN or if you're staking WAN in, some of the nodes, then you'll be eligible for a 50% discount on these fees, assuming,
Okay.
you're staking enough or you're holding enough.
Right. That's another thing I'm experiencing right now with staking Crow. They have different benefits for staking X amount of Crow and helping with the ecosystem. Another aspect is Wanchain has a variety of new partnerships since the last time we've done an interview together. So could you walk us through some of the significant partnerships since the last time we spoke?
Sure, yeah. I think what you're referring to is a lot of the new network integrations, that we've done, kind of hand in hand with those projects. So in the last few months, we've done things like Metis, that's another Ethereum layer 2, Gather Network, FX Core, and Horizon. And this is just to name a few. So this is something, if you're familiar with Wanchain, is just kind of par for the course. We're always adding more and more chains. And as much as possible, we're working with those projects themselves, to kind of increase interoperability industry wide. And the kind of, what it means for Wanchain, it's what we do. Our goal is to
Right.
kind of integrate all of them. So it expands the whole network. This is also very important. And we also have a totally kind of unified system. So when we integrate a new network, it's now able to connect to all of the different networks that we've previously integrated. So for
Yeah.
example, right now we have almost 30 networks. And so if we add something, for example, like Horizon, now it's essentially already connected to 29 other networks. And then similarly, any of the assets that exist on those chains. And
So,
yeah, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, let me stop you there. How do these partnerships benefit the Wanchain ecosystem? Does it give the end users more ability to move between chains? Do you think it's opening the eyes of end users on some of these smaller chains to what is possible in the industry? What do you feel the biggest benefits are to working with a variety of new chains?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of benefits, but the biggest benefit is exposure to different communities.
Okay.
When we integrate a new chain, they get exposed to what Wanchain is, learn about that, and then our community gets exposed to different ecosystems.
What that chain's about, yep.
Yeah. So for example, we talked a lot about Cardano. That's obviously been a huge thing. I think there's probably a ton of people who are using the Wanchain bridge now on the Cardano side, who up to that point may not really have heard about Wanchain before. So I think that is a huge benefit, and we're seeing kind of the results of that in terms of our transaction volumes, cross-chain volume, all on the ups, all looking really good right now. And then on the other side, there's just kind of more tangible benefits too. So for example, I mentioned Metis as one of the kind of recent integrations. So because it's an L2, it expands XFlows. So because all of our different products, they're all built on this core cross-chain infrastructure. So the whole kind of product base itself gets stronger as we add more and more chains. If it's an L2, it helps things like XFlows. If it's not an L2, then it still allows us to kind of wrap assets on those chains. And the asset flow goes both ways. So it's not only about bringing USDT from chain A to the new chain. These new chains assets can also come into the Wanchain layer 1 to all these other networks, really kind of just dependent on what the user's needs. And sometimes the projects themselves, have their own specific requests, and then we'll do our best to meet those as well.
When you look to the future of Wanchain and the Wanchain ecosystem, can you give us a future outlook for, say, the next 6 months to a year of goals that you guys are trying to reach, any new partnerships or ecosystems you guys would like to integrate? Where does Wanchain sit 1 year from now? In 2024, Halloween, what are you guys emphasizing at that time?
Sure. Wanchain, honestly, we're one of the busiest teams in the space. So there's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to come out in the next 6 to 12 months. Obviously, the things that are working well right now, we're going to keep hammering those in. So things like XFlows, it's just getting more and more popular. So we're going to expand XFlows. That means more routes, more assets, more chains. Just last week, we just launched or expanded ETH XFlows to BNB chain. So you're going to see things like that. We're going to expand it to Avalanche and then more and more layer twos as we continue to support those. We also got a few other products, like there's the X Stake, which you didn't really talk about, but this is kind of a staking platform to really support the Wanchain infrastructure. And so right now it allows, users to stake and kind of delegate their WAN to either bridge nodes or our POS nodes for the layer one. This is also going to be expanded. Part of the vision here is that you're going to support, or we are going to support different assets. So you'll be able to stake, for example, USDT directly into X Stake and things like that. So you're going to see more assets and kind of more functions to allow you to actually deploy nodes using XStake and things like that. And then,
when do you feel XStake will be launched for the ecosystem?
So the XFlows version 1, this is already live. So right now you can use XStake and delegate your WAN, stake your WAN into the various two types of nodes that Wanchain ecosystem has. But we want all of these kind of pillars of the Wanchain ecosystem to keep evolving, and so we're going to add more functions, more assets that you can stake, and things like that. So 6 months, a year from now, instead of right now you can only stake WAN, you're going to see a variety of assets. You're going to see USDT, USDC stake directly, into XStake.
Okay, like so you're saying more assets into the staking aspect.
Right. Because, what XStake does is that it strengthens, all of the products that we have in the Wanchain ecosystem themselves. So for example, with XFlows, it uses ETH, it uses USDC, it uses USDT. So where does XStake fill in? This is where some of this liquidity is coming into, to make kind of XFlows more powerful. So instead of, only being able to send, let's say, 20 BTC at one time, maybe you can send 200 BTC at one time, for example, because you have this liquidity element to it. So these kind of different pillars, they work together, they make everyone stronger. This is kind of the vision. Then the kind of base layer, as we talked about, we're always adding new chains to our cross-chain infrastructure. So you're going to see definitely new EVMs. You can kind of look at where Circle is expanding and launching new USDCs. This is probably a good kind of strategy if you want to guess where we're going to go next, because as I said, we want all of our things to work together and each of our integrations to make everything stronger. So if we have XFlows there and we want to be able to do, USDC to USDC, if Circle is going to a new chain, launching real USDC, it makes a whole lot of sense for Wanchain to integrate that chain as well, because then suddenly XFlows becomes stronger too. And then, because our specialty is these non-EVMs, this is something that other kind of bridge makers are not as good at doing, things like Cardano. So you're going to see, non-EVMs, at least a couple of them will be live in the next 6 months. These obviously take a little bit longer to integrate than the EVMs, which are basically automatic at this point. And then the kind of next big, let's say, pillar of the Wanchain ecosystem, this is going to be our cross-chain message passing platform. So right now our bridges, they're really more for kind of value, BTC, ETH, these type of assets. But our cross-chain messaging platform, this is really for kind of arbitrary data and messages. And so right now, we started kind of sponsoring and joining more hackathons, kind of getting more hackers and developers to kind of build use cases for this. And so you're going to see a lot more of that, us joining these type of, these type of events.
What type of data could you see moving between chains? I think that's a very unique aspect. When you think of financial records, when you think of deeds for a home, if you could move them between chains, I mean, there's a million different things that are real world on-chain assets. If you could move them between chains, that could be unique for sure.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely nice use cases for that. Also, similarly, it could be even things that, at a glance, let's say, are not exciting, but like the weather. You could, as kind of blockchain, becomes more mainstream and adopted, by the world. That's the type of data, that people need. What's the weather going to be like? So this can exist, on a single kind of weather network chain, and then you use cross-chain messaging to kind of grab that type of data.
Across.
And in itself, it's not a kind of valuable asset like ETH, but it's still kind of very valuable data that, you could see, think of on your phone the number of apps that plug into weather data. So this is the type of things that can be kind of made possible from cross-chain messaging. And so a final thing that I'll mention, just because I'm sure some of the Wanchain community is listening and they're going to, hammer me if I don't mention it, but we're definitely improving and giving a facelift in terms of UI and UX to a lot of our existing products. So that means the bridge, that means, Xstake is relatively new, so it can kind of give you an idea of what the bridge itself is going to look like. So just across the board, anything that's officially coming out of Wanchain, you're going to kind of see improved UI and UX as well.
Okay, great. Is there anything else you would like to add to conclude the interview today?
Well, first, I'd just like to thank you again for having me on. I always like chatting with you. These are good talks. And then I just also want to thank all the listeners, Wanchain community. If you're listening, we definitely appreciate your support, and keep at it. Every time you guys tell us where we can improve, we really do our best to kind of tackle those problems. And I think everyone will agree that things are kind of moving in the right direction with Wanchain. And so it's going to be a fun, next several years, and I'm looking forward to the journey together.
All right, great. I appreciate you being here today, brother. It was good to talk to you again. This has been Cross-Chain Bridges, Connecting Cardano with Temujin Louis. Thank you for being here, brother.
Thanks a lot. Talk soon.
All right, bye-bye.